She walked into my office 6 months after her surgery holding a grocery bag. She put it on my desk and said, "I ate everything on this list, every single day. Everything the label said was good for my heart." I looked through the bag: whole grain crackers, low-fat granola, a bottle of canola oil, cholesterol-free margarine, orange juice with added calcium. I looked up at her and said, "I know. That's the problem I want to talk to you about today. My name is Dr. Robert Caldwell. I'm a cardiothoracic surgeon with 30 years in the operating room and more than 2,000 chests opened. And what I'm going to tell you today is something I wish I could say to every patient before they end up on my table, not after. The food industry has spent decades teaching you to read one thing on a label, one number, one word. And that single word, heart healthy, has sent more patients to surgical tables than most people want to believe. Not because people aren't trying, because they are. They're doing exactly what they were told. The man I think about most was 71 years old, retired high school principal, sharp, careful, genuinely committed to his health. He brought me his food diary the day before his bypass, 2 pages, front and back, filled with foods that every label, every magazine article, every well-meaning doctor had told him were good for his heart. And his arteries looked like the inside of an old copper pipe, calcified, narrowed, inflamed. The kind of damage I associate with someone who had spent decades doing everything wrong. He had spent decades doing everything right. Wrong, as it turns out, is what the label said was right. It's time we look past the labels and see the truth about heart health. Join me in reevaluating what we put on our plates. I want to start with something most cardiologists don't have time to explain. After 60, your arteries are not just passively narrowing. They are actively responding to what you feed them, specifically to the inflammation those foods either create or reduce every single day. Chronic inflammation is not a dramatic event. You don't feel it. There's no moment when it announces itself. It is slow, constant, low-level damage to the inner lining of your blood vessels, the endothelium. Day after day, meal after meal. The wrong food doesn't cause a heart attack tomorrow. It builds the environment in which a heart attack becomes inevitable 3, 5, 10 years from now. The foods I'm going to tell you about today all share one thing in common. They carry labels that say heart healthy, low cholesterol, low fat, whole grain, or natural, and every single one of them triggers that chronic inflammatory process in a body over 60. Let's start with the one hiding in plain sight in almost every American kitchen. Vegetable oil, canola, soybean, corn, sunflower, the clear bottles lining every grocery shelf with the words heart healthy printed directly on the label. For decades, medicine told you to replace saturated fat with these oils, lower your cholesterol, protect your arteries. That advice made sense in 1970 based on the data available in 1970. We are not in 1970 anymore, and the operating room has shown me what 4 more decades of evidence has confirmed. These oils are extremely high in omega-6 fatty acids, specifically linoleic acid. Your body needs some omega-6. The problem is the ratio. For most of human history, people consumed roughly equal parts omega-3 and omega-6 fats. Today, the average American over 60 consumes anywhere from 15 to 20 times more omega-6 than omega-3. That extreme imbalance is one of the primary drivers of chronic systemic inflammation. Not the inflammation you feel in a sore joint, the inflammation that silently attacks the lining of your coronary arteries every single day. Research published in peer-reviewed journals has shown that linoleic acid from these oils promotes oxidized LDL, the form of cholesterol that actually causes plaque formation, far more aggressively than saturated fat ever did. And here's what makes it worse. When you heat these oils to cooking temperature, they oxidize. They break down into compounds called aldehydes, the same toxic compounds found in cigarette smoke. You can't see it. Your food doesn't smell different, but the damage inside your blood vessels accumulates with every meal cooked in that bottle of oil you thought was protecting you. The fix is not complicated. Extra virgin olive oil for everything that doesn't require very high heat. It is rich in oleocanthal, a natural anti-inflammatory compound with decades of research behind it. For high-heat cooking, real butter in reasonable amounts. I know that contradicts what you were told in 1985, but the science has moved on. And as someone who has looked inside thousands of chests, I can tell you the evidence points clearly in a different direction than the labels do. Now let's talk about something that might be sitting in your pantry right now, something with a heart logo stamped on the front of the box: whole grain cereal, granola, whole wheat crackers. These foods have been positioned as the cornerstone of heart-healthy eating for 30 years. And there's a real biological mechanism that makes whole grains genuinely better than refined grains. The fiber, the slower digestion, the reduced blood sugar spike. That part is true. What the label doesn't tell you is what those foods have become after industrial processing. When you take a whole grain and crush it, extrude it, heat it, add preservatives, flavor it with maltodextrin and natural flavors, and added sugar to make it palatable, and then stamp it with a heart logo, you don't have a whole grain anymore. You have an ultra-processed food that happens to contain some remnant of a grain. The Lancet Regional Health published a study in 2024 tracking over 206,000 health professionals for up to 32 years. People who consumed the most ultra-processed foods had a 16% higher risk of cardiovascular disease and a 23% higher risk of coronary heart disease compared to those who ate the least. And what were those ultra-processed foods? Largely the same foods lining the heart-healthy aisle: the granolas, the whole grain crackers, the fiber bars, the cereals with the red heart. Every serving of these products triggers a blood sugar spike significantly higher than the packaging implies. That spike drives an insulin surge. That insulin surge, repeated multiple times per day, year after year, promotes arterial inflammation, endothelial dysfunction, and the kind of metabolic disruption that shows up on my operating table years later. Now I want to talk about the one that genuinely surprises people most, because this food has a health halo so strong that questioning it feels almost irresponsible. Fruit juice. Not soda, not sweetened drinks. Juice. Orange juice, apple juice. The bottle that says 100% natural, no added sugar, good source of vitamin C. Let me tell you what happens inside your body when you drink 8 ounces of orange juice. Your blood sugar spikes within 15 to 20 minutes, far faster and higher than if you had eaten the actual orange, because the fiber that slows sugar absorption is gone, removed. In a whole orange, that fiber is doing critical work. In the juice, it's been discarded as waste. The glycemic impact of a glass of orange juice is comparable to a can of regular soda. That is not my opinion. That is the measurable blood glucose response in clinical studies. And for a person over 60 with any degree of insulin resistance, which applies to the majority of people in that age group, that repeated daily spike is chronically damaging to the vascular endothelium, the thin inner lining of your arteries, the exact surface where plaque begins to form. The natural sugars argument doesn't hold. Fructose, whether it comes from a soda or from freshly squeezed orange juice, is processed by your liver in the same metabolic pathway. In excess, it produces the same triglyceride elevation, the same inflammatory cascade, the same arterial stress. The vitamin C does not cancel out the damage. I wish it did. Eat the orange. Drink water. Your arteries cannot read a nutrition label. Next, and this one requires me to be precise, because I don't want to condemn an entire food category: low-fat dairy, specifically the low-fat yogurts, low-fat milk, and reduced-fat cheeses that have been marketed as heart-protective alternatives since the 1980s. The original logic was this: fat raises cholesterol, so remove the fat and you reduce cardiovascular risk. That logic has been largely dismantled by research over the past 20 years, but the products built on that logic are still on every shelf with the same heart-friendly packaging. Here's what removing the fat actually does. First, the food tastes terrible. Second, manufacturers know that, so they replace the fat, which provides satiety, slows digestion, and carries fat-soluble vitamins, with added sugar, modified starches, and artificial flavoring to make it palatable again. You remove the thing that was probably not causing the problem and replace it with something that demonstrably is. A 6-ounce container of low-fat flavored yogurt can contain 20 to 25 grams of added sugar, that is 5 to 6 teaspoons, in a food that carries a heart-healthy reputation and is eaten for breakfast by millions of people over 60 every single morning. That sugar drives the same insulin response, the same blood sugar spikes, the same arterial inflammation we just talked about, but it's invisible because the label says low-fat and the packaging shows fruit. Full-fat dairy, whole milk yogurt, aged cheese, real butter, contains conjugated linoleic acid and fat-soluble vitamins that the low-fat version is stripped of. Multiple large studies, including data from the European Prospective Investigation into Cancer and Nutrition, have found no significant association between full-fat dairy consumption and increased cardiovascular risk. Some analyses have found a protective effect. This doesn't mean eat unlimited amounts. It means the fat in real dairy was not the enemy. The replacement was. The last food I want to talk about is the most insidious, because it doesn't come in a package you can scrutinize. It comes in a bottle, from a company you trust, with a logo you recognize, and a claim that has been repeated so many times it feels like scientific fact. Margarine. Butter substitutes, spreads made from vegetable oils with added plant sterols, marketed specifically for cholesterol reduction. I understand why they exist, I understand the intention, but when you take the same industrial vegetable oils we already discussed, high in omega-6 linoleic acid, and you hydrogenate them to make them solid at room temperature, you create trans fats. And when regulatory pressure eventually forced manufacturers to reduce trans fats, most reformulated with intraesterified fats, chemically rearranged fatty acids that are, if anything, more metabolically disruptive than the trans fats they replaced. These products are sold with clinical language, clinically proven to reduce LDL, proven to lower cholesterol, and that claim is technically accurate. They do lower LDL. What those studies rarely report prominently is what else happens. Some formulations reduce HDL simultaneously, the protective cholesterol. Some raise triglycerides. And the inflammatory load from the base oils themselves continues regardless of what the plant sterols are doing to LDL numbers. I have operated on patients with beautifully controlled LDL numbers and arteries that looked like they had been eating cigarettes for 30 years. Because LDL is one number in a complex system. What drives plaque is oxidation. What drives oxidation is inflammation. And what drives inflammation, meal after meal, year after year, is exactly the oils these spreads are made from. Use real butter in reasonable amounts. Use extra virgin olive oil. Cook with whole foods. Stop reading the front of the package and start looking at the ingredient list on the back. If you see soybean oil, canola oil, or partially hydrogenated anything, put it back on the shelf, no matter what the front of the box says. Here's what I want you to leave with. I am not telling you that eating well is impossible. I am not telling you that every label is a lie and every food company is your enemy. What I am telling you is this: the system that created the heart-healthy label was built to sell products, not to protect arteries. And after 30 years of opening chests and seeing the damage those products have caused in people who were genuinely trying, you deserve to know the difference. 5 swaps. That's all I'm asking. Replace your vegetable oils with extra virgin olive oil and real butter. Replace processed whole grain products with actual whole foods, oats you cook yourself, real vegetables, whole fruit instead of juice. Replace low-fat flavored dairy with full-fat plain versions, and sweeten them yourself so you control what goes in. Replace margarine and butter substitutes with real butter, and stop trusting the front of any package. Read the ingredient list every time. Your arteries are remarkably responsive. They are not passive victims. The inflammation that is quietly damaging them right now can be reduced, measurably, meaningfully, sometimes within weeks of changing what you feed them. I have seen it on follow-up imaging. I have seen patients' inflammatory markers drop. I have seen blood pressure stabilize without medication changes. The body wants to heal. It is always trying to heal. What it needs from you is to stop handing it the things that are working against it, especially the things dressed up to look like they're helping. Look, I'm a surgeon, but I'm not your doctor. Everything I've shared today is based on published research and 30 years of clinical experience. Before making changes to your diet or your medications, talk to your own physician first. They know your complete history and your individual risk profile. What I want is for you to walk into that conversation informed, with the right questions, because the food you eat 3 times a day is either fighting the inflammation in your arteries or feeding it. And now you know which side those labels are actually on. Take care of that heart. It has never asked you for anything. Give it real food.